A little black thing among the snow, crying weep, weep in notes of woe. Where are thy father and mother, say? They are both gone up to the church to pray. Because I was happy upon the heath, and smiled among the winter's snow, they clothed me in the clothes of death, and taught me to sing the notes of woe. And because I am happy and dance and sing, they think they have done me no injury, and are gone to praise God and his priest and king, who make up a heaven of our misery. The Chimney Sweeper, from Songs of Experience by William Blake. It's 4 a.m. in the heart of Victorian London. The day is still to come and the birds are yet to sing. But there's one distinct sound that breaks through London's icy fog. The hacking coughs and the raspy splutters of the sweeper children, already hard at work. Today's episode of Tales from Our Dark Past focuses on a fictional child chimney sweep named Jack. Please note, today's episode features facts and elements from real-life historical accounts and is intended for educational and documentary purposes. It contains non-graphic discussion of tragic real-life events that are already publicly available. Viewer discretion is advised. And if I could just ask one small favour before we get started. If you enjoy our videos, please consider hitting like and subscribe. It really does make a massive difference to our small channel as we're still on our quest to reach our first 1,000 subscribers. Thank you. It's only 4 a.m. when Jack is awoken from his awkward, broken sleep by a sharp knocking on the cellar door. Him and 4 other boys all awoke in a startle, as if they'd only managed to drift off to sleep just moments ago. Not even reaching the peaceful escape of a passing dream before their night of rest was over and the hard work started all over again. Jack hurried as not to keep his master waiting. He knew better than that. So he pushed aside the dirty, itchy soot sacks that he'd been using as a blanket and went to fetch his shoes. The cellar in which he resided housed 5 apprentice chimney sweeps, or climbing boys as they were also known. They were all aged from 5 to 7, with 6 being seen as the ideal age for an apprentice sweep to start his career. Jack was fast approaching his 6th birthday. Or was it 7? The wretched days seemed to have all rolled into one. The repetition, the grueling workload, the lack of rest. The weeks felt like months, and the months years. Scrambling to grab his shoes, he found a rat had curled up to sleep in one of them. Jack almost envied his peaceful slumber before shooing away the flea-ridden thing and slipping them on. His shoes were a sorry sight, full of rips and holes, barely enough to cover his aching feet. And just like his raggy clothes, they were black with dirt and soot. His only comforts were a thin, straw-filled mattress, which he shared not only with the other apprentices, but also with the fleas, lice, and bedbugs that added to their restlessness. The cold English weather caused damp and mould to take over the cellar, with draughts that whistled through the cracks in the walls, unleashing their icy chill into the room. The shivering that followed seemed like a small price to pay for the fresh air that they craved. The smell alone was enough to get up your nostrils for days, but their soot-covered noses could hardly notice it anymore. Once up on the surface, Jack's rumbling tummy would have to wait. It wasn't time for breakfast yet. A chimney sweep's day started before the rest of the populations did, often rising at 3 or 4 a.m. to get to work before the city started lighting their fireplaces. Jack hurried to grab his equipment, heavy rods, brushes, and a scraper, He had to carry all the tools of his trade around with him, even though they almost weighed as much as he did. Struggling to even see through the early morning darkness and thick London fog, Jack accompanied his employer, known as the Master Sweep, to the first house. Although he wasn't looking forward to the job at hand, stepping inside was a welcome relief from the bitter cold. The house was nice. It was a large, multi-story home with fancy wallpaper, expensive ornaments, and furniture that looked so comfortable, Jack let out a yawn just picturing what it would feel like to rest on it. Before a sudden self-awareness pulled him back. He knew he had to be careful not to get soot anywhere or he'd surely be in trouble. So timidly, he navigated his way through the home, being careful not to touch a single thing. They stopped in front of a large ornate fireplace, and as the Master Sweep talked charmingly to the lady of the house, Jack fumbled through his equipment, finding his brushes and scraper. "Well, what are you waiting for, boy? Hurry up!" The Master Sweep snapped at Jack, whilst gesturing impatiently towards the fireplace. Yes, sir," he replied, while scurrying inside. Jack stared up into the bleak darkness above him, before taking one last deep breath of fresh air and beginning his climb. There was no safety ropes or harnesses, despite the chimneys reaching the height of the rooftops. Jack had to rely solely on his strength and agility to navigate the narrow opening. The space was around the size of a microwave door, and he had to use his knees and elbows to grip the jagged bricks, often wearing them raw as he shimmied his way up the chimney. He reached up, brushing and scraping the soot that encrusted the narrow passage, all without losing his grip. Each movement would knock down heaps of soot straight onto Jack, making it even harder to breathe in the already claustrophobic space. The air inside was hot and suffocating, and it was almost impossible to see in the sooty darkness. The winding, narrow chimneys would often have sharp corners and bends, creating dangerous points in which disaster could strike at any moment. As you can see here, this old diagram of a Victorian chimney design shows multiple sweeps navigating the perilous climb. One poor soul has slipped, falling downwards and wedging his legs tightly against the chimney walls. This was a sweep's worst nightmare. The only way to get them out once stuck was another chimney sweep would climb up after them to tie a rope around their ankles. Then they'd pull on the rope until he was eventually freed. But this didn't always produce a positive outcome, and many perished from the ordeal, needing to be dug out through the chimney walls. Another shows a sweep trapped after a large build-up of soot collapsed. For him, there was no escape, as the soot instantly replaced what little oxygen he had available. Jack tried not to think of the possible dangers and carried on scrambling further up the chimney, brushing and scrubbing the walls as he went until he came across a particularly stubborn clump of soot. He reached for his scraper and started chiseling away, stretching his arms high above his head, held in place by only his knees, which had now started to tremble. He thought he had a firm grip, but his shaking knees gave way and he suddenly slipped downwards, just managing to slam his elbows out in time to stop himself from getting stuck. Startled and a little shaken, he gasped for breath in the sooty air and froze exactly where he was, almost too afraid to carry on. As he clung tightly to the walls, his mind drifted. He thought of his mother and wondered how long it had been since he'd seen her. He hoped his father was well and couldn't help but wonder if they still thought about him. The memories he had with his family and life before were now blurry and muddled. It had been a long time since the day his father told him that he had to leave. Jack was sure it couldn't have been an easy decision, but he was still too young to truly comprehend how he got there. Like many sweeps, Jack came from a poor family, and as soon as he was old enough to earn his own bed and board, his father made an agreement with a local master sweep. Jack was to become an apprentice chimney sweep, and his father signed over full legal guardianship in an agreement that would last till adulthood. Other sweeps came from workhouses or orphanages, which was a win-win for the master sweep, since he was often paid by the local parish to take in waifs and strays as apprentices, pocketing the cash and gaining a steady flow of labourers. All he'd have to provide them with in return for their hard work were basic meals, a weekly wash, a place to sleep, and a set of clothes. Some also got a set of slightly nicer clothes to wear to church on Sundays, if they were employed by one of the kinder sweeps. Jack continued to daydream for a few moments until he was abruptly woken from his daze by a loud yell. "What are you doing up there? Get a move on or I'll light the fire up under you," the master sweep shouted up into the darkness before striking a match just loud enough for Jack to hear. That was enough to bolt Jack back into action. He scrambled up the chimney, heart pounding, brushing and clearing as fast as he could, until eventually he saw a glimmer of daylight up ahead. And in a puff of black smoke, Jack's head popped up above the rooftops. He frantically inhaled, trying to breathe in as much clean air as he could. But his throat was sore and scratchy, and the sound of him coughing up clouds of soot echoed over the houses. His eyes were swollen and stinging. He tried to rub the soot from his face, but only pushed it in further, making the burning even worse. Once his eyes adjusted, he glanced out over London. The sun had begun to rise in the distance, casting a soft glow of warmth over him. He wished he could stay and take in the beauty of the sunrise, but there was still much work to be done. Before Jack could even properly catch his breath, he had to make his way back down the chimney to collect the soot that had gathered below. The master sweep would then sell the bags of soot as fertilizer to local farmers and traders. If that wasn't exhausting enough, it would actually take more than one climb to finish the job sufficiently. By the time Jack was done, he was wheezing and covered in soot. The lady of the house seemed to take pity on him, maybe because of how harsh the master sweep had been, or perhaps due to the sad contrast between him and her own children. Whatever the reason, she insisted on giving Jack a smart winter coat and a sturdy pair of shoes that had belonged to her son. Jack's eyes lit up with delight. At last he'd have some protection from the elements and the constant cold that he'd grown so used to. The only issue now would be keeping hold of his precious new belongings. Once they got outside, it was finally time for breakfast. Jack had certainly earned it, and his stomach was growling. Yet all he received was a slightly stale piece of bread with a thin smear of butter. The bread was quickly coated in soot as soon as it touched his hand, but he still ate it slowly, savouring every bite. Weight gain was seen as an obstacle to the job, and master sweeps had little incentive to feed their apprentices well. In fact, it was in their interest to keep the boys thin and small enough to squeeze into the chimneys long after they should have outgrown them. As the day went on, Jack scrambled up and down 5 more chimneys. But unlike this first house in the early hours, the sun was now up and the city was wide awake. Households were making breakfast and warming their homes for the day, and since most homes relied on open fires for heat and cooking, chimney sweeps often had to work around fireplaces that were still warm or had only just been put out. By midday, some chimneys were still smouldering, and it wasn't unusual for a sweep to be sent up before everything had fully cooled down. The chimney walls could become scorchingly hot. To cope with the heat, some sweeps would dampen their clothes with water beforehand, hoping to protect their skin, but it was only a small comfort. Chimney sweeps were expected to work around the routines of each household. Whether it was a good time to clean the chimney or not, the job still had to be done. Jack could only hope that the next house would show some kindness and consideration, taking the time to properly extinguish and cool their fire before his arrival. But deep down, he knew that that was unlikely. 4 to 6 chimneys was about the average amount he'd have to sweep every single day, with even more in the lead up to Christmas. There was only one exception. The sweeps were allowed just a single day off each year, on the 1st of May. This became known as Chimney Sweeps Day, and they would dance, celebrate, join in with festivities, and eat expensive food like roast beef and plum pudding. It was a day that every apprentice looked forward to and cherished, but it was always over too soon, and for Jack, the next one was still months away. As the sun started to set, slowly disappearing behind the rickety London rooftops, Jack was more than ready to return to where he called home and eat a good meal. But unfortunately, that wasn't what was waiting for him. The diet of an apprentice chimney sweep in the Victorian era consisted of very little. Mostly just stale bread and butter, cheap watered-down porridge or gruel, potatoes, weak tea or plain water, and if they were lucky, they'd get some leftovers from the master sweep's kitchen. It lacked key nutrients needed for healthy growth, with very little fruit and veg, dairy and meat, which when paired with the soot-filled conditions left them constantly worn out and lacking energy. When Jack finally returned home that evening, his body ached, his throat burned, and his eyes still stung from all the soot. But more than anything, he was hungry. He sat cross-legged on the cold stone floor as one of the older apprentice chimney sweeps passed around their evening meal. It wasn't much, just a piece of stale bread with the faintest smear of lard spread across it, a bowl of watery gruel, which was just a greyish lumpy paste that looked more like glue than food. There was also half a boiled potato, but it had already gone cold. And this was washed down with a murky tea which Jack sipped from a little tin cup between each bite. It wasn't enough to make them feel full, but just enough to keep them going. Jack ate in silence, chewing slowly, trying to make the meal last. But as they all sat around eating their dinner, the other boys started to comment on the new coat and shoes that he was given earlier. After dinner, they were so tired they could barely keep their eyes open and soon hunkered down for another night of broken sleep. Jack's eyes were heavy, but he felt oddly alert. His only focus was to guard his new belongings, so he folded his coat up into a pillow and rested it under his head. He kept his shoes on. At least while they were still so nice and new, he was going to keep them on his feet as much as he could. Those who managed to fall asleep were often awoken by the constant itching from the lice and bedbugs. Others would be up coughing, keeping themselves and everyone else awake. Then the cold and damp would often lead to nights of shivering, with only soot bags as cover. It wasn't until their exhaustion eventually got the better of them that they'd finally be able to drift off to sleep. Then before they knew it, it'd be time to start all over again. As Jack closed his eyes, he clung to the simple hope that one day, if he worked hard enough and stayed strong, he might grow into a master chimney sweep himself. Maybe then he could have a better life, earn decent money, and no longer fear the daily climbs. It was a small dream, but it gave him something to hold on to through the long days and the cold nights. A dream of a better future. In Jack's time, apprentice chimney sweeps in the Victorian era had little to no protective equipment. There were no masks or safety gear, and spending long hours in cramped chimneys filled with soot meant many sweeps developed health problems over time. Common issues included aching joints, twisted knees and spines, inflamed eyes, and in some cases, even blindness, as well as lung-related illnesses. Some even developed painful skin conditions, which became some of the first officially recognized work-related diseases in history. The job also carried serious risks. Accidents happened. Some apprentice sweeps would get stuck in the bendy, narrow spaces. Others injured by falls or by chimneys that hadn't fully cooled. But still, the practice continued for over 2 centuries. Slowly, things began to change. Public awareness grew, and campaigners pushed for reform. Real change finally came with the Chimney Sweepers Regulation Act of 1875, which made it illegal for anyone under the age of 21 to be sent up a chimney. And eventually, after the introduction of more advanced cleaning tools, the need for child sweeps disappeared. These new tools allowed chimneys to be cleaned from the ground, helping bring an end to one of the most dangerous jobs in human history. Jack's story, while fictional, is based on real experiences of thousands of children who worked as apprentice chimney sweeps across the UK and beyond. Their struggles led to important laws that helped to protect future generations, and their stories continue to remind us of how far we've come and how important it is that we keep moving forward with compassion, empathy, and kindness. Thank you for watching till the end, and if you haven't done so already, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. We put a lot of time and care into researching, writing, and creating these videos, and if you enjoy them, we'd really appreciate your support. Thank you.